Howdy mates, here's a part 3 video. We're over at the Flatwoods trail right now at the Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center. So right now we're actually now a bit more in the uplands of Florida's lands. So with that being said, we're essentially in a Mesic Pine Flatwoods. Now, when I first got here, I actually talked to an individual named Michael. He's essentially the supervisor here at Check, and he mentioned with me that they actually had some recent fires out here. Prescribed, of course, not natural. But here you really have a glimpse of some of the aftermath of a prescribed burn. Now I'll explain in a second why it's important. But before I get into in depth on that topic, you see all of these projections coming out of the ground. This is actually from something called a Saw Palmetto. Now, what's particularly neat about a saw palmetto is that they are a keystone species, and it's a plant. Now you may be wondering, how might that be the case? Now, as I've mentioned before, a keystone species is essentially like an engineer for an ecosystem. Other species rely on that engineer for them to survive. Another great example of a keystone species, as I've mentioned before, is the gopher tortoise and the American alligator. But in this case, it's a plant. Now, what's fascinating about the saw palmetto is you may think of them as just a tiny little shrub. But that's not really the case. When you actually see the leaves of a saw palmetto, that's like the tip of the palmettoberg, as I want to put it. You can see the saw palmetto actually has a very extensive network, especially when it comes to their roots. And they're a keystone species because in this type of topography, they actually provide stabilization. Because, it may not surprise you, but much of Florida's soil is mostly sand. And sand tends to be very unstable. It's very loosely configured. So those saw palmettos essentially provide a structure for our other fellow homies and even the other plants that thrive here, whether they be shrubs or even the slash pine, for instance. So here we go. This is actually perfect. I can actually, in a sense, demonstrate what I'm talking about. Let's see if we can find an example. Maybe. Here we go. Perfect. Whoops. Here we actually have a saw palmetto. The way you can know is by looking at the stem. It actually has a rather square shape, and actually along the edge of the stem they have like little tooth margins. So that's how you know if you're actually looking at a saw palmetto, hence the name. But you can see, like, what you're seeing right here is only the tip of it. But if you actually look a little behind it, you can find its extensive network. And saw palmettos are actually recognized as some of the oldest types of plants that have really existed in Florida. And the prescribed burn happened here because it provides a means of rejuvenating a landscape. So in case if any form of vegetation becomes out of control and might take over unintentionally, it can cause any other native plants to basically be drowned out. And thus, particular forms of wildlife, such as butterflies, for instance, which need, a decent number of host plants, might potentially be drowned out, thus preventing the further biodiversity. Not only that, but once a prescribed burn takes place, it actually provides essential nutrients back into the soil, especially in the form of carbon. Because as many of you well know, carbon is the most essential element for any living component. I mean, think of it this way. When people choose to be cremated, those ashes are essentially a form of carbon. No different than here. So whenever a prescribed burn happens, like the aftermath, it provides an opportune moment for regrowth. It's quite neat, you guys. It's alrighty. Thank you all for watching. Like I said, I wanted to be sure I didn't make the video too long, in case if I may have bored you guys. I certainly hope not. And, feedback is always welcomed, too. For instance, if you want me to make a video on a particular topic, I would be most certainly happy to. So, thank you guys for watching. Enjoy your Wednesday. And once again, Journey on a Journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.